Ladies and gentlemen, the American jury and Bulldog Nation, court is in session. You do not need to rise for Judge Bulldog. You can remain seated. Today, I am going to explain to you this week's Bostock decision of the United States Supreme Court in the most simplest of terms so all of you can understand both the legal and political aspects of it. And I'm going to also put it in context. This case arose out of three individual plaintiffs, the first one being named Bostock, thus the name on the case. I also want to point out to you that every single circuit in the United States, which is the appellate courts across the land, every one of them have ruled differently what the U.S. Supreme Court just ruled. But I want to explain it to you, both legally and politically. It's very simple. Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act provided it bars discrimination in employment based upon race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This fancy word for a law passed by Congress and signed by the President of the United States. The United States Code is filled with them, and they keep adding them every time they're in session. But this is simply a federal law, 1964. And since 1964 and the enactment of this case, if you had any adverse employment action based upon you being black or an Indian or your religion or the fact that you were a woman or your national origin, you were from Mexico, if you could prove adverse action, you could take up legal action against your employer. And this happens in all kinds of manner. It can be they fire you because of it. You don't get a raise because of it. And this is what the law says. Now, here is what happened this week in the announcement. Gorsuch, who was a Trump appointment, wrote the opinion. Roberts, who was appointed by Bush, he joined in that opinion. Two Republicans joined Kagan, Sotomayor, Ginsburg, and Breyer, the Democrats. And I believe from a political standpoint, this group wanted someone on this team to write the opinion for more political oomph. Opposing this decision with a dissent that was 100 pages long, Alito Thomas. Kavanaugh wrote another dissent. This is what this group found. They said a strict reading of this, strict reading, says Scalia, he was the famous Supreme Court Justice, Antonin Scalia, who said, it has got to be strict interpretation. And you've heard these debate in political segments. You've heard it, and it says, hey, we don't want judges who interpret the law. We want people who or don't make law, that they just simply follow what the law says. Strict interpretation, constitutionalist. And that's what Scalia was. So what they did is they claim with a smirk and a smile, they say, hey, we're just doing it the way he would do it. Strict interpretation of this, sex, right here, under here, it applies. Here is what the dissent wrote. Sex is not the same as sexual orientation and identity. By the way, I left one out here, age. Age is another one that you can bring a cause of action. So it's that simple. They're saying that the word sex in here covers sexual orientation and identity, LBGT. And these folks are saying, no, it does not. It is preposterous. And that had never been interpreted that way before. Kavanaugh's dissent was really kind of interesting. He simply said, hey, I disagree with this, but the gay community has fought long and hard, and I'm happy for them. It's kind of interesting. The impact. What does this mean? It means if you can prove a negative employment action based upon sexual orientation and identity, you can take legal action. So, what that means is if you're fired from your job and you can prove that you got fired from your job, for example, I think Bostock was on a gay softball team, and he told them they were gay, and they fired him because, I'm laughing because it's terrible. They fired him because he was kind of like holding the employer in bad light. Now, this is what now there will be. Now, just think about this. Think about all the gays in the United States, the LBGT community. This will be an explosion of litigation against employers because here's what happened. I've been in the club car of law and politics. I know how the game is played. I'll make a confession to you. When I used to do employment cases, every single time a black person came to see me about an adverse reaction or an adverse employment action, or they were over 65 years old, I would say, or a woman, I would say, do you want to play the card? Most of the times they would say, hell yeah, I want to play that card. You just say, hey, this is because of race. Now, the federal process, you have to start your claim through what's called the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which, by the way, Justice Thomas once ran. So that's the process, but there's going to be an explosion because people are going to play the gay and LBGT card. Now, here is my opinion of this from a legal standpoint. They're wrong and they're all right. From a practical standpoint, I get it. I'm not up in arms about this at all. In fact, I support the conclusion of the case. You shouldn't be fired because you're gay or you're LBGT. And chances are, before you're ever hired, they got to be careful about that, but employers are pretty canny. They know you are. Give me a break. You shouldn't be fired just because you're gay or LBGT. This doesn't change my opinion at all about if you got a willy whacker, you use the freaking male bathroom. But I don't, and even Trump shrugged. Trump shrugged and said, oh, very powerful decision. Trump isn't complaining and jumping up and down because you should not be discriminated. Now, I disagree with it because I agree with their lot. Sex is not the same. Now, here's where I differ from all the right-wing conservative people that think Scalia is the greatest Supreme Court justice of all time. As someone in the trenches in the law, I want judges to get it right, and do justice, especially on the lower court level. I'm not into this. I can tell you right now, if I was a judge, I would be one of those interpreters. I wouldn't be a strict. I would look at the facts and law in front of me, and I would do justice. I wouldn't do law. I would do justice. Now, let's have some fun politically. Ladies and gentlemen, the American jury, Bulldog Nation, since the beginning of time in the United States, presidents have become disappointed about their appointments to the Supreme Court. And I would like all of you to understand that, this is very, very important, that judges are as political as your congressman, U.S. senator, state representative, from local judges all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. They are political animals, especially when they're vying for a federal appointment, which is lifetime. Remember, federal judges are appointed for life. There's only been like one or two that have ever been impeached and lost their position. So just think about that. It's for life. So once you get the appointment, there ain't anything they can do to you. I have found that judges, being just as political as anybody else, cannot be trusted, just like other politicians. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. was appointed to the Supreme Court by Teddy Roosevelt. They were close personal friends, inner circle, club car, dining with each other, with others, close personal friend. When the famous Northern Securities case ruling came out, which was in Teddy Roosevelt's favor, breaking up the Northern Securities Railroad, Holmes voted against Roosevelt's position. Roosevelt never forgave him and actually said this: you could get more of a spine out of a banana than you could Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. Now, that is just one example. These judges get on there. Now, I know this for a fact. Judges tell these presidents what they want to hear to get on that freaking court. Another famous one that blew up in his face was Eisenhower's appointment of Earl Warren. He appoints a Republican, Earl Warren, governor of California. The Warren Court instituted in the 1950s and the 1960s this wholesale, and by the way, I'm not disagreeing with it, these rights for criminals. All of those laws, all those Supreme Court rulings came under the Warren Court. Another more recent appointment that blew up on him was George Bush 41's appointment of David Souter from New Hampshire, who was an odd guy. Guess what? Became a flaming liberal. You cannot be naive when you appoint these people. It's why, like, for example, the Attorney General. The most important appointment for a president is the Attorney General, and he ought to be your buddy. I'm going to give you an example. Barack Obama had, as his Attorney General, Eric Holder, who he referred to as his wingman. If I'm ever president of the United States, my Attorney General is going to be a wingman. He's not going to be a spineless guy like Jeff Sessions. Now, Gorsuch. Here's another thing. Roberts voted to uphold Obamacare. These guys are so political, they read the newspapers. And you know what the left plays on these guys? Reverse psychology. They pound them in the media on it. You know who doesn't play ball? The stalwarts. Thomas is a stalwart. Roberts, he'll go either way. He is not a conservative stalwart. It looks like Gorsuch isn't going to be either. Looks like Kavanaugh, he may not be a stalwart either. It's amazing. It is truly amazing. These are political animals. And by the way, for those of you that think, well, this is wonderful. And by the way, appointing a federal judge for life, they don't have to worry about running for office, raising for money, and everything else. And that's a good thing. But they're not answerable to anybody, and that's a bad thing. That's a bad thing. But I'm telling you right now, for those of you that say, oh, well, this was great because once they get appointed, they can be independent and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, they sell their souls to get that appointment. They sell their souls to get it, man. Lifetime appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court, you are in the freaking history books. Think about that. If you're on the U.S. Supreme Court, you've made it. You are in the history book in a big way. And you can serve 30, 40 freaking years on that bench, and you can have a gigantic impact on this country. So there it is. It's very simple. That's the law. They're saying that this word sex applies to sexual orientation and identity. They say it doesn't. Bottom line is, there's going to be a lot more litigation. Just a Bulldog. Every dog has their day. Court is now out of session.